According to the 2022 Data Breach Investigations Report, the human remains the number one driver of breaches today, demonstrating that cybersecurity is no longer just a technical challenge, but a human one as well. But how do you manage the human risks of cybersecurity? It starts with measurement. Only by effectively quantifying human risk can organizations engage employees with relevant activities to truly change human behavior. That's human risk management. Map key human behaviors to the business risks that matter most to your organization for free by visiting securityweekly.com/living security.
The Security Weekly News is live on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time most every week. I try to scan and produce a quick look at some major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Jason Wood, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you will look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. It's a little quiet on Discord today. You guys we've had some good Discord chatter the last few weeks, but a little quiet today. All right, gents. Let's get into the article. So, article number 1. Companies are starting to feel the pressure of the new SEC regulations, even though they're not in effect yet.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like some organizations trying to get ahead of the game. Obviously they take effect in December. I think December 18th is the drop dead date for that to start. But the article goes through a story about Clorox and an incident that they had, and they actually submitted the documentation to the SEC. Some of the notable facts around that is, even though they were expeditious in their notification, it came out that the quality was a little bit lacking, right? Because they had, an absence of the size and materiality of the incident and how it translated into their financial impacts. But yeah, companies are starting to ramp up their game, it looks like.
Well, I think the pressure is you got 4 days to respond. You may not know the full extent of it in 4 days. So I think in the Clorox case, they filed and then they had to do an update to the 8K once they had the details to complete it. And I think this is an interesting learning point for organizations, right? The 4-day timeline is going to put pressure on people to get the notification done. And if this is an acceptable practice by the SEC, get the notification done early, even if you don't have all the details, maybe, and then follow up with the rest of the details so people can understand materiality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's something that we need to define a little bit better, because if you look at the disclosure language, it actually says disclose within 4 days, describe the material aspects of the incident, the nature, the scope, the timing, the material impact. Or reasonably likely material impact. So, it's one of those scenarios where, like you said, you're not going to have all of that information. So you're going to have to go back and actually update it all.
Yep. Agreed. Article number 2. Let's see. The CISO Carousel and its effect on cybersecurity. So I brought this article in because I think this is a very interesting risk that people aren't actually talking about. We have so much kind of churn at the chief information security officer level. And we've talked about kind of the tenure of the CISO and those sorts of things. But what is the impact to a cybersecurity program with this constant change out of a CISO?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get that sustainability of leadership, right? And that consistency. At the end of the day, we're still having conversations around a chief information security officer lasting about 18 months, right? So, we've both started new leadership lives in the last couple of years. It takes a couple of years to get your feet underneath you, right? To even really start making an impact. You have to learn the business. You have to learn the players. You have to take a look at the current state of what's happening within your program, evaluate where there's gaps, define the future state and then evaluate where there's gaps. That all takes time. And, you spend your first good year learning the organization on its own.
Yeah, you're learning the business, right? I mean,
Yeah.
by the time you've learned the business and figure out how to effectively implement the program, you're thinking about, well, what's the impact here if I get walked, if we have an issue or something happens, or you get approached from a different company. It's really hard. It's been a difficult, I think, situation in the industry, and it's left companies. I mean, I think they're making really poor decisions by switching out leadership that quickly because it doesn't give the program time to mature and actually get its feet. I mean, people want fast results, but in actuality, it takes time to get meaningful things done in the cyber side.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'd love to hear your feedback. The article actually goes into why they think the causes of the churn is, right? And it's, scapegoat effect, lack of board support, stress and burnout.
Stress,
and
yeah.
then, all of the rapid transformations that are happening. They called it the next big challenge, right? So the rapid innovation, the rapid, technology migration and obviously change in regulatory and compliance side. So I'm interested to hear your feedback on, did they miss any?
Well, look, I think the one that I think they are missing a little bit of is I've heard from a lot of peers in the industry over the time, and I think I've seen it a couple times myself, is that the CISOs making recommendations and investment, and while initially you've got that kind of new guy effect and it's tolerated and it's okay, yeah, we'll put that money in, it kind of gets I guess long-winded for the corporate organization, right? And I think the pushback is, man, we need to switch this out because we're not seeing the results that we want to. But it takes time to have that investment pay off and make sense. And so I've heard many times from peers, and I just heard it from somebody the other day saying, hey, I heard from people there, a year after I left, that things are finally starting to make the corner and make the change. And it's like, well, yeah, because you made the investment, right?
Right.
And it paid off, but it takes that time. And so I think companies aren't patient. They're not willing to wait around and have that payoff. I think in many times they're looking kind of on the sales side of the quarter to quarter results, and it doesn't work like that for us. It really is putting the investments and the strategy in place that has a long-term payoff and gives you stability. And I think that's why some of that hop is there. I think on the CISO side, they get very frustrated with, there's some traction and then, they hit kind of a wall and there's pushback. And I think it's figuring out how to change the dialogue around that to keep the momentum going forward.
Yeah. And then that becomes a question. Are these conversations that we're having during the courting phase of hiring? Should we be having those conversations around, understanding an expectation that this is a journey? This is the long ball. We're going to make,
that's a hard one too, right?
Progress over time, but this is a long ball commitment that you need to be part of this journey. Are you committed to doing that for me as the CISO?
Yeah, and I think that's really hard conversations when you're, look, everybody's in different states, right? I'm kind of out there right now looking myself, and when you're having those conversations, and it's treading the fine line between the honesty and trying to get the job for a lot of people. And so I think, especially as people rise up in the ranks and they haven't done that before, if I look back, like there are definite red flags and things that I think come up that I didn't know about in the first and second CISO roles, right? Like it's just things that you're not aware of because you haven't been in the seat and you don't have the experience, that you look back and you go, man, that was telling. The reporting structure was telling, right? Like the discussions we had around investment were telling. And so if you know those things going into it, again, depending upon the circumstance, so it's hard on the dynamic of that hiring relationship to be able to say, are you doing this right? And that's why I think all of us, like when we're having these conversations, like it needs to really be consistent. Like I've often wondered why there isn't there's societies around other C-level or execs, I think specifically around CFOs and legal, right? Like, why isn't there that for CISOs, right? And kind of a code of practices or commonality ethics, like things that everybody should be asking for when they're looking for those roles, because that's where we fail a lot. I think people don't ask for things they need to be asking for. D&O insurance, retention bonuses. If you get walked from the job, like that, you have a soft landing and a parachute, right? We need to be asking for those things, as well as how we have those budget discussions. It's just really, really important for the longevity of CISOs and having a longer tenure, which I think is going to result in better security as a whole.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was long-winded.
And Matt, for your lead-in for this one, all of that while we're struggling to get budget.
Yeah, exactly right. But I got to go back to the first story first, because at the bottom of that first story, I was talking about how this is a Sarbanes-Oxley moment for cybersecurity, and we've talked about this on the show, because I remember the days of Sarbanes-Oxley. Like, I was doing regulatory stuff at that time, and yes, it can be, but it's got to Ben's point, like, people have to recognize it and kind of get the CISO and the CEO kind of on the same page. And that means making sure they can make the right investments, they have the right budgets to do it, which leads into the third story, because these are all the challenges. This is what creates this churn. Like, you want them to come in and reduce risk, but then at the same time, you're cutting their budgets when they probably need those dollars to actually do their job. You wonder why they leave.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the stats that they had in this article were crazy, right? I mean, 2020 to 2021, 16% growth in budget. 21 to 22 was a 17% increase, and then 22 to 23, 6%. Womp womp. I mean, that's sad trombone all day long.
Right. And we were talking a little bit on the previous segment about some of the challenges of say easy but do hard, like get your arms around all your entitlements in the cloud and all the data sources in the cloud, but yet you have less budget to get all that hard stuff done.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, the most frequent time to get a significant budget bump is after a breach or issue, right? Whether you're the existing CISO or you're coming in as a new CISO, like their money gets thrown around at that point. But it's wasted almost, right? Because you've experienced that breach and the cost. And so as a result, like if you had spent that money, maybe even half of it pre-breach, probably a much better impact, right? Like, but that's not, people aren't seeing that for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, the other one too is aligning the security budget with IT spend. X% of IT spend will be security, right? And I don't think that's the right methodology either, because I feel that there are times when you cut IT budgets, you should be increasing security budgets.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, especially to deal with tech debt or legacy systems and other things that you can't refresh that are now creating additional risk to the business. How do you mitigate that? By 100%. Cutting security budget?
Right. Now you're just compounding the risk.
Right. Exactly right. This fourth article? Yeah, I think it's fourth. This is a ransomware model that a CISO put together, presented at Gartner Security and Risk. I thought this was really interesting. And what I like about this, it's actually a quantitative model, right? And what I think is really interesting about risk management in general is a quantitative approach, regardless of the model under the covers, is always going to produce better results in a qualitative model because of a gut kind of check. And so what I like is this is actually a quantitative-based model to make some decisions around should I or should I not pay for the ransom. Now, she admits in here that, look, every organization is going to be different, but it's a really good starting point for quantifying ransomware attacks and what you do from them.
Oh, and I think it's a have to have these days, simply because, again, we are promoting speaking the language of the business, right? How are you going to sit across from a CFO if you don't have that information in front of you? I've said on this show a lot. I've sat in front of CFOs who say, you want to know what? I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this business back up and running, no matter what. So I'm not losing X amount of millions per hour, per day, per month, whatever the case may be. I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring that, back up. If we can sit back and quantify the risk and actually bring the business conversation to the table and show a CFO as to why we should not be doing this, that's speaking the language of the business.
If only we had a magic mirror and we could have those CFOs look into the future after they've had a breach when they're talking about investment decisions for our last conversation.
Right?
I'll do whatever it takes. Only post-breach.
Do I need to just spend money to get the business back up and running? I've sat in front of many CFOs.
Yeah,
first conversation that they have, the first statement that comes out of their mouth, as soon as you say, don't pay.
Yeah, and it's frustrating, right? Because this is, as an industry problem, I'm a big believer in not paying, right? I mean, again, everybody's got to make decisions, right, based upon the business. But at the end of the day, like, paying these ransomware just makes it worse, right? And the stats about how many people get hit again because they see that you'll pay, it's not encouraging. So there isn't really a lot of good indication to make for paying. Yeah, I'd like to look more into this model and delve into it. It does make sense to have something to be able to put.
And honestly, guys, the underpinning of what made it successful, she kind of lists it out, right? And it's things we talk about here all the time. Build relationships, build honesty and transparency, which is the trust factor that we talked about. Understand the business, and then simplicity. Keep it simple. Keep the conversation simple, right? I mean, those are all those success factors that we talk about all the time on how to get to that point where you can speak the language of the business. It's those things.
Yes, it is. Speaking about leadership, we switch over to our leadership portion around volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and the VUCA model. There's some really interesting twists to this model. Now, we've been talking leadership and communication, Jason, 4+ years, right? Mm-hmm. And we've always talked about some of these in the traditional context. This article from Harvard Business Review talks about some of the twists to put onto this model that I thought were really interesting, because the first one, I got to scroll down to it, is don't rely on active listening. Do use the new science of active questioning. Now, why is that important, right? Because we talk about active listening a lot, and there's an article in here that's going to bring this up just to let people know, like, this is a common kind of leadership skill. And the shift here is not to listen for the sake of listening, but it's to listen to the response of questions to kind of pinpoint decision making, right? And I thought it was just a really eloquent way to think about the concept of active listening. Isn't just about listening, it's about listening to the response to questions to help you make decisions.
Right. And ask leading questions, plant seeds, right? So, it's not, and I just want to clarify for everybody here, it's not letting go of active listening. It's having more quality in that active listening session, right? So, listen to responses. Instead of asking why, ask things like who, when, where, how, those type of things. Plant seeds in the conversation to get that conversation moving forward. So it's about taking that active listening to the next step.
Yep. Yeah, to the next level. The next one. Yep. Don't optimize the plan, optimize the planner. Pretty interesting concept, huh?
Oh yeah. No, I absolutely love it, right? It's about making that that planner more versatile, right? Looking at different ways to shift and be agile and plan for any type of disruption or change. So it's, instead of creating this really locked in structure, process, procedure, start looking at different things that could be happening so you can plan for your plan B, your plan C, your plan, you know what I mean? And really start looking at all the different things that could be happening, so that way you can be agile on your feet and prepared. It's that muscle memory. It's why we do tabletop exercises, right? It's why we do those exercises to make sure that our process and procedure are on point, because if there's any disruption, we need to be able to spin on a dime, adapt and overcome.
Yep. Ben, I thought you had a comment in here somewhere, so I paused for you to come in.
No, I was just going to say, I think when you think about this, I mean, part of it is not necessarily just the questions that you ask, but looking to, I guess, eliminate the bias that you bring coming into something, right? Try to think about questions that are going to get to points that you may not have considered before, that are eventually going to lead you in a direction which you wouldn't have thought of. And so I think that for me is where this really kind of hits home, is that you've got to open yourself up to other possibilities, so you're not just stuck in the framework that you're going off of in the past.
Yeah. I think the last one in here is don't disassociate fear and anger, use emotion reset, because the concept of ignoring fear and anger is not necessarily good either. It's kind of resetting those emotions and using them in a more productive way. Again, things we've talked about and think about from a leadership perspective, but just some new twists on how to expand those concepts in ways that they can be used to help you be a better leader.
Yeah, I absolutely love that portion of it too. Because so many instances, they talked about how they worked with an NFL quarterback, right? And about how some of his responses were fight or flight. So what did they end up doing? They practiced that fight or flight so that way the quarterback was more in tune with himself to know when that fight or flight response was happening to minimize him improvising in the middle of the game, right? So, again, it's that muscle memory. It's practicing when you're under stress. It's practicing when you're in that flight or fright mode. So you know yourself. You know how you're going to react to certain situations so you can plan better.
Yep, absolutely. Off to our final 2 communication articles. The first one is how to be more effective. Number 1 on the list is practice active listening, which should be practice active questioning.
Exactly it. Active listening and active questioning. I'll put them both. I don't think it's one or the other, right? I think it's right. A combo of both.
Yeah. I also took cultivate empathy as also almost an emotion reset. Like, yes, you have to be empathetic, but can you use emotion reset to also help in that situation? Anyways, I was trying to apply the previous article to this one in this 4-step process.
Yeah, and in that continuous improvement mindset, they also say reflect and improve, right? Look at what's going on and figure out ways that you can identify gaps and continuously improve what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. This last article I absolutely love. I saved it for the end because as leaders, we fall in this position a lot where you disagree with a decision or an outcome or something. And this article actually talks about how to respectfully disagree in those situations. Because at times, as leaders, we sometimes don't stand up to kind of make those disagreements, right? Which is not necessarily a good thing for the company. Sometimes you have to do it. And this article gets into more of the art of how to do that in a respectful way. So I thought this was a really great article for people to read because this is difficult, right? Because there's so much emotion sometimes in the decision that you really need to kind of look at some of these kind of key areas to actually help you do it in a very respectful way.
Yeah, I mean, if we take a step back, we're put in leadership positions because the value of what we bring to the table, which means diverse thinking, right? So unless you're in an organization that is command and control from the top and promotes groupthink, which isn't an organization I would want to be part of, it's expected that you're not going to always agree. You're brought to the table for your opinions and your professional experience and your knowledge to be able to move that organization forward. Now, the blessing and the curse is that if you're going to disagree, you need to bring your A game, right? The blessing is that you're respected to disagree and bring your opinions to the table. The curse is you're going to actually have to put some elbow grease into it, right? You're going to have to come with your A game and know your stuff and why you're disagreeing. You have to be 100% professional and respectful. I mean, it can't be an argument. It's got to be, professional negotiation, let's call it. Diverse opinions being brought to the table. And you really have to go into it with that A game.
Yeah, without a doubt. Because it happens a lot. Like, it just does, right? I mean, especially guys like us, we've been in the industry a long time. Like, we've seen some of this stuff be like, yeah, we've done that before. It didn't work. It's not going to work again. But, but sometimes they don't hear
Pick
you.
your battles.
Right. Oh, that was one of them there, right? I mean, it's choose the right time. The right time to disagree with something may not be in the middle of a leadership meeting when you disagree with the CEO. That may be a little side backroom conversation that you have to have and reset expectations and get it all out there. There's one of these things in leadership over time that I've always said, and it's benefited me a lot. It's called the 11th commandment, right? The 11th commandment is if you disagree with someone, you may have to take that into a back room, a side office, a dinner or a lunch, and then you guys can go beat the crap out of each other, right? But you come back stronger as a team. So it's one of those scenarios where the right time, the right place, how you're articulating how you disagree. All of that environment matters, right? So again, disagreeing with the CEO, it may not be a leadership meeting that you want to do that. It may be a side conversation, a lunch, a dinner, or something.
Yeah,
Been there,
agreed.
done that.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and take it offline.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking about biting our tongues, we're going to bite ours. I'd like to thank everyone for watching and listening. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.